be surprised around.
No, don't do it, man. You make life on yourself.
Oh, this is so rubbish now. I can't believe that it went live. literally pressed the button by mistake. So guys, if you're watching this, yeah, this is not obviously the beginning of the class. I'm gonna guess some. What a catastrophe. Channel. Salam. All right, sisters, that side, men this side. Yallah. You know what I'll do? I'm connecting to your thingy, your hotspot for this. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's okay. And that's not good because that's my one there. So I need something. Am I going to know your one, which is different? I don't want to connect to this at the same time. I don't want to threaten this. So there's no way out.
I don't know. I mean, can I change the name? How do I change the name?
No, I don't know how you change your name. So that's going to get too complicated. Let me think. What do we do here?
We have to change the name here.
I don't know. Okay, who's got an iPhone, non-iPhone, personal thingy, hotspot? What does your phone identify as? Pixel underscore 666. Yep, got it, yep. You're gonna do what? I need a password, type it in. Do you know it?
It's kind of long. Can I send it to you on?
No, just come and type it yourself. Oh, yes, sick. Who just dropped that one? Anjiva, come on. This is tradition of the dars, by the way.
Yeah, I did tell him that you told me not to.
Oh, really, yeah?
I said, well,
Type Patty, man.
Is that okay?
Sorted, yeah? Are we in?
Connected?
Let's have a look. Yes, Jazakumullah khair, well done. Sorry, folks, for the thingy start. I pressed the live button by mistake. Oh, no, it's not connected.
No?
1 second, it's saying it's on. Yeah, it's connected, yeah. Working.
25, 21, upload.
What network are you on?
Me?
Was it Zain, Mobile, do you remember?
Yeah.
All right, we're good now. Alright, folks, alright, let's start then. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa al-aqibatu lil-muttaqeen, wa la udwana illa ala al-zalimin, wa salawatullahi wa salamuhu ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen, Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla, wa anta taj'alu al-hazna idha shi'ta sahla. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husna ibadatika ya rabbil kareem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Good to see you folks here, obviously. Good to see the guys online. And it's very nice to have Sarah Amir back, mashallah, who's been missing for ages. And we did not miss her summaries. Well, we missed her, but we didn't miss her summaries that we had to read and stress over. But we do want her summaries back, as long as I don't have to read them, as long as someone else does the checking. All right, am I in the middle of the picture? Right, I think I am. All right, folks, so alhamdulillah, another blessed opportunity. I think it was the right decision. We were planning to do this in Mecca. The program had it as Wednesday night, and then we found out that there was the possibility of adding another Umrah, Umrah as well, quite possibly, another Tawaf opportunity. And that's definitely what I want to prioritize, especially when we're in Mecca with such restrictions. Any opportunity to do extra tawaf, even if it means people are absolutely smash knackered and it means 2 a day or 2 sessions a day in which you do multiple tawafs, definitely going to prioritize that over the dars. So we moved it to Monday, and there's a lot of khair in that because we got a very nice room, nice and quiet, no problems and the like. So alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Folks online, obviously, Jazakumullah khair for accepting the 6 p.m. UK start on a Monday, but it was a bank holiday. We did a little check and everyone's happy with that on the folks that I asked anyway. So for those that this is the first logical progression for in person, for you guys here, I mean, as a live audience, then this is obviously our long-term fiqh class. You can come right around here, guys. This over here, yeah. Shanoz over here, yeah. No. This way, yeah, this way. This is our long-term fiqh class. Long-term meaning it's been going now 10 years. We do it every week. An hour, theoretically. Hour and a half, more realistically. And it is covering a text, a fiqh text, which basically covers absolutely everything to do with worship. We've been spending most of our time on the purification and the prayer, and we are now coming to the end of the matters of the prayer. So that's where we're at, okay? So today's particular chapter, today's particular, how can I say, section is covering something which we've already covered before in volume 2. I don't know what year that kind of corresponds to, but not that many, maybe 3-4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And that is the prayer times. So we've covered the prayer times in detail, but now we're coming at it with a fresh angle of the supererogatory prayers, meaning those non-obligatory prayers and their relationship with the prohibited times of prayer. So when we covered it before, we were defining them, spending a lot of time on defining the concept of time and then prayer time and the like. Now the focus, and then we spoke about it from an obligatory prayer angle. Now, because we're covering the supererogatory prayers, those non-obligatory prayers, how do the prayer times relate to that? That's the subject of today's dars. And it will not just be today, it will be the next few, I think, sessions. We'll be covering that as well. All right, folks. The page number in the sharh is 109. 109. Let's have a look. Yes, it is 109. My trusty paper says that. Right, okay. So we're on page 109 at the top. The text, some folks can drop me some of that translation and the Arabic, please. That would be great. But from what I have in front of me, then the author of the original text, he says, وَأُوقَاتُ النَّحِي خَمْسَةٌ مِنْ طُلُوعِ الْفَجْرِ الثَّانِي إِلَى طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ ومن طلوعها حتى ترتفع قيد رمح وعند قيامها حتى تزول ومن صلاة العصر إلى غروبها وإذا شرعت فيه حتى يتم ويجوز قضاء الفرائض فيها وفي الأوقات الثالثة فعل ركعتي الطواف. I don't think we'll get to that, but the original part we will. Let's see, have we had the text pasted? No, we haven't. Huh? Is it down at the bottom, yeah? Why is it that I can't see that?
When everybody was saying it,
Oh wow, now I don't have it. Chalo. Sugar, why is that? Why have you got that and I don't have that? That's weird. Right, okay. So, the text that we're covering today, the prohibited times for general prayer, quote unquote, okay, are 5. Number 1, from the true dawn until sunrise, from the sunrise until it has risen above the horizon, the length of a spear, from the zenith until it starts to descend, after praying Asr until the beginning of sunset, and from the beginning of sunset until it is completed. These are the 5 times. It is permissible to make up missed obligatory prayers during all these times. It is also permissible to perform the 2 units of tawaf during the 3 short prohibited times. That's in this list, it's 2, 3, and 5, as well as to repeat a congregational prayer during them. I don't think we're going to get to that section right there, but that's good enough. Mesa, if you can print that again, or with that, if you can copy and paste that. For some reason, that comment didn't come at all on my... right, Sarah Amir has done it. Good. Well done, Sarah. Right, so this is about then understanding the movements of the sun. Some of you folks, obviously, Aqidah here and Fazana, we just obviously did this last week or the week before. So we're talking about the movement of the sun and its relation to the prohibited times. Obviously, the prayer times are entirely linked to the movement of the sun. If you want more details about this, then Mesa, if you can tell us what the actual lesson would be for people who want to find out more, then I'll give you that reference and you can check it out. So the way that the author has grouped out these 5 times of prayer, the prohibited prayer times, is to put them into a bundle of 5. But this bundle of 5 is going to be divided into 2. Let's go and see what Sheikh Uthaymeen he says. So these are the times in which the prayer is prohibited, and by that, non-obligatory prayer. In principle, non-obligatory prayer is to be continued continuously. It is to be prayed all the time. In principle, the prayer is to be established all the time. This is because of the generality of the meaning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu rka'u wasjudu wa'abudu rabbakum waf'alul khayra la'allakum tuflihun. O you who believe, bow and prostrate and worship your Lord and do good so that you may be successful. Surah Al-Hajj verse 77. This is a verse which is establishing worship generally and the prayer generally, and therefore that means all the time. If we're going to stop it, we need a very direct evidence to stop it. So the basic principle has been established from the Quran. وَبِعُمُومِ قَوْلِ and بِقَوْلِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and then also from the generality of the statement of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم when he said to the man who did a favor for the Prophet ﷺ, and he said to him, ask for whatever you wish as a form of payment. And the man said to him, I want your companionship in paradise. The Prophet ﷺ said, okay, anything else other than that? No, that's what I want, Ya Rasulullah, nothing more, nothing less. And the Prophet ﷺ said, then help me to help you achieve this by doing lots of prostrations, by doing lots of sujood. All right? So if you ask for a solution and you're told then I want you to do lots of sujood, then in principle that's to be done all the time. The reason we're going through this methodology is to understand actually what are the principles with respect to how we come to rulings. This is the reason we're doing it like this. So from the Quran and the Hadith, it is clear that we are meant to pray all the time, right? We're talking about non-obligatory prayer. You are meant to pray 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except when explicitly you are told not to. And that's basically the subject of our class today, okay? These are 5 times that we can discover that you are not allowed to pray. 3 of them are very short times. 2 are quite large periods, okay? 3 are very short, 5 are very large. Again, I will repeat basically what these times are. So the first time is from the true dawn until sunrise, and the second time is from the sunrise until it has risen above the horizon, the length of a spear. The third time is from the zenith until it starts to descend. The fourth is after praying Asr until the beginning of sunset, and then the fifth is from the beginning of sunset until it is completed. These are the 5 prayer times. All right, let's go into detail. The first one, min tulu' al-fajr al-thani. The first prohibited time, according to the author, who is Hanbali, in his opinion, is after the second Fajr. The second Fajr indicates there's a first one. The first Fajr is called the false dawn, unlike the true dawn. All right, so the false dawn is a time in which the prayer is not established. All right, the first dawn, and this is known as the adhan of Bilal, and this is sometimes, I don't know if you guys have been hearing that adhan. Yeah, you've been hearing it when it's not the time for Salatul Fajr. So it's going off, you know, an hour, half hour before. That is a kind of like a wake-up call. You know, hey, if you're fasting, eat. If you haven't prayed your witr, pray it. So it's like a warning kind of call. That's the time of the first Fajr. It doesn't actually allow the Fajr prayer to start, and a person can carry on eating as well. It's that second adhan. It is the actual Fajr adhan, the true dawn Fajr, which is the start of the Fajr prayer time. So according to the author, the first time starts from the prayer time. The reason I'm emphasizing that is because we're going to disagree with this position in a minute, okay? So he's saying from the actual start of Fajr, a person is in a prohibited time. Now, before we move on to discuss this, I want to just quickly remind you, because again, we have actually covered this before. So those students who remember this from back in the day, Mesa has said that this was covered in year 4. So it was 6 years ago that we covered this in chapter 15. The references is there. Shazad has posted the video as well as the text of the lesson in the portal. So I want you to understand, I want you to look at the background that I have here. Let's see, I move this way a little bit, okay? And I want you to imagine that you're looking out your window, and if you're looking out of your window, you can see the horizon, and the horizon is effectively where the furthest point that you can see out of your window. So we're talking the normative row of houses and the hills or whatever, and no major massive blocks in the way like a mountain or like, you know, big blocks of flats, but we're just talking basic kind of, you know, you're high up in the bedroom and you can, you know, see all the rest of the houses as far as the eye goes. And then the sun, the sky will obviously be filling up the top, and where the sky and the land meet, that's called the horizon. And this will be this line here. Imagine this line here. When you look at this line will become illuminated. All right? It will start to become full of light. When this line becomes full of light along lengthways, this is what's known as the true dawn, which indicates that there's something called the false dawn. Now, the false dawn is not associated with the horizon. So I want you to imagine that if you were to go outside into your garden, okay, or outside into the middle of the night, in actual fact, if we use Medina as an example, the problem with Medina as an example, actually it's a major problem, is that there is a ridiculous amount of light pollution. All right, so when you go outside, you can, you know, you've seen the pictures from space. They literally sending pictures because it's that illuminated, right? It's ridiculous. And this is the kind of thing you got to do out in the wilderness, in the rural areas, where you can actually see proper darkness. So imagine all the lights were off in Medina, right? If you go out now, we've got 5:40 the second adhan. So if you go out around 4:30, 4:45, 5 o'clock a.m. at the moment, and you were to look up into the sky, and I mean straight up into the sky, then if you were to look up like this, you would see a diffuse light in the middle of the sky like this. That's stretching like this. So it goes from the back and it comes to the front, okay? It goes from the back and it's diffuse, so it's not very clear and it's not very bright either. And the interesting thing about this light is, number one, that it is this direction, so it's running parallel, okay, to your standing, all right? And the other thing is that it is very temporary. It's a very, very short period of time. The other thing about it is that it will disappear. So even though it will illuminate the sky, it will then disappear and darkness will reappear. That's the false dawn. Even though the sky brightens up and a person might think it's Fajr time, it's not. The true dawn, on the other hand, has different characteristics. First of all, it is mustatir, it is spread out. So by that meaning, it's not in the sky, it is connected to the horizon, and it is spread out. So something in the sky versus something which is connected to the actual horizon itself, from left to right. So not only does it spread out, but it's connected. Therefore, that means that when it enlightens or illuminates, you see the skyline in front of you. This here, it starts shooting up like that. Whereas at the false dawn, there's darkness here. There's a gap, actually. If you look at the horizon during the false dawn, you'll see darkness, 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 and then the light starts in the middle of the sky. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because in the summer, especially from the countries that we're from, Northern Europe, Europe in general, certainly Northern Canada, Northern US, in the summertime, because of our high latitude, because we're so high, the amount of sunlight in the sky or twilight in the sky makes everything very difficult to differentiate. But you will realize that the light which is in the sky is not actually connected to the horizon. It is very important to understand basic skills to look at the horizon and see whether light is connected to it. Another clue which helps, which you would have noticed here in Medina as well, very nicely here in Medina, is the redness. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Al-Fajr wal al-humr al-mustatir. Al-humr al-mustatir, meaning the redness which spreads. So that means that it's not just the white light that you're looking for, but you're looking for better redness as well. And it's spreading lengthways from side to side. All right? So Shaykh Uthaymeen, he summarizes this to differentiate between the false dawn and the true dawn. The false dawn starts nothing, it just wakes you up. The true dawn is what initiates the Fajr prayer. The first way to differentiate it, he says, is that there is no darkness after the true dawn. After the false dawn, darkness reappears. That's the first thing. The true dawn, it just keeps getting brighter, 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 brighter until the sun rises. After the false dawn, it is bright, then it goes dark, then it starts to get brighter again. So that's the first sign of the difference. The second difference is that the true dawn is connected to the horizon, the false dawn is in the middle of the sky. All right, there's an actual gap, whereas the true dawn is connected to the horizon. And the third one is that the false dawn is going this way from back to front, whereas the true dawn goes left to right. And that means even when it's not at the horizon, even when it's above the horizon, the light is coming like this, from left to right, as opposed to appearing in the middle first. Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah? These are the three differences that you yourself can use, especially at times when there's a lot of light pollution, or when you're in that summer kind of period, in the idea of the kind of the times when we're back home. All right. Now the Sheikh said, "Min al-Fajr al-Thani," meaning the author of the Hanbali text, Imam al-Hajjawi. He said, "Yani from the second Fajr time," meaning from the true dawn time. And he didn't say from Salatul Fajr. He didn't say from Salatul Fajr. And the reason they said this is because of a hadith that they use. And this hadith is actually a weak hadith, which is why this opinion is to be criticized. The hadith, which is weak, says that when the Fajr starts, then there is no prayer except for the 2 units of Fajr. When the Fajr starts, then that means the true dawn. When it starts, then there is no prayer except the 2 units of Fajr. Now, this hadith, إِذَا طَلَعَ الْفَجْرُ فَلَا صَلَاةَ إِلَّا رَكَعَتَا الْفَجْرِ لَا صَلَاةَ إِلَّا رَكَعَتَا الْفَجْرِ. There is no prayer other than the 2 units of Fajr. That's the hadith that the Hanbali school uses. Now, before we start to take apart what this actually means, just a little grammatical point that Shaykh Uthaymeen wants to make. Whenever you in Arabic use the word la, the lam, to indicate or to negate, there are different types of negating lam. You can either negate, as Shaykh Uthaymeen says, the actual existence of something, so it doesn't exist, la whatever, it doesn't exist, or you're negating the validity of something, that this is invalid, all right? Or you're indicating its perfection, so it's deficient. So for example, Shaykh Uthaymeen gives an example. He says, La khaliqa illallah. Okay? La khaliqa illallah. That there is no creator except Allah. This la, this lam, this negation is the negation of existence. That there does not exist. It's not possible, and there isn't a creator except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we look at the context of the sentence to help us determine what type of negating lam has been used. A different sentence, for example, La salata bighayri tuhur. There is no prayer without purification. Is this the negation or lam of negation of existence? Why not?
Because
There still is a prayer.
Because there still is a prayer. The prayer is being offered. This is what we call the lam of a siha, nafi siha, meaning that it has negated the validity of that prayer. The prayer is there, but it's an invalid prayer because you prayed it without wudu. So because we know that around the sentence, we are able to work out the nature of that lam. The reason why this is important, by the way, is that scholars, when they come across a hadith, in each time the lam will just say la, 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 and it's up to you to be able to work out, is it trying to negate its existence, negate its authenticity, or negate its excellence? The third example will make this clear. The Prophet ﷺ said, for example, La imana liman la amana lah. There is no iman for the one who has does not carry the trust. Okay? The one who does not fulfill the trust. This hadith, if you imagine it, la imana, right? There is no iman for the one who cannot be trusted effectively, right? Which would indicate, depending upon how you translate this, as something incredibly serious. If a person lied, for example, a person made a mistake, for example, a person was, whatever it is, okay? That would mean that he's become kafir because there's no iman, there's no faith. That's if we translated this as either negating existence or negating validity. So we know from a fact that it's possible for a person to do sins and to not ruin the whole thing. And so therefore we understand from this sentence that the lam which is negating here is not negating existence or validity, it's negating completeness. So the way that we would translate this, because we know now what lam is being used, is that you have not attained true faith if you cannot be trusted with the amana. We add the true kind of word in to indicate that you haven't lost everything, but you've got a deficient level of iman. So this is a nice reminder, of course, for the students that it is important to understand the various forms of negation and affirmation from the language which is used. So our author, what did he say? لا صلاة بعد طلوع الفجر إلا ركعتا الفجر. That is the weak hadith which is being used. Now, when you say la salata, so that could either be there is no prayer, okay? There is no prayer, or that prayer is not valid, or that prayer is not complete. So there's no prayer after Fajr starts except that of the two Fajr. We know that there can be a prayer. You could pray that prayer. So it's not obviously existence, but it means the validity of that prayer. So any prayer which is offered after the adhan is going to be invalid. Now, what is the consequence of the Hanbali position using this hadith? All right, I know this might be confusing some of you folks, like what's all this going on? I'll make it easy. You know how some people go to the masjid and they are there and the Fajr adhan goes. After the Fajr adhan goes, what are some people doing? They pray their two sunnah very quickly and they start praying nafil, isn't it? You know, maybe the salah is, the iqamah is half an hour away, the iqamah is 20 minutes away. And I can tell you now that I have visibly, or not visibly, I have physically, I have noticed anyway that the time has reduced in Madinah. 100%. In the last 10 years, 15 years, you're always getting a good 25 minutes. Huh?
15 minutes.
Before or now?
Now it's 15 hours.
Now it's tops. It's like 10 to 15 minutes.
Depends on the imam.
Right? I think that, but there's been a push, and I don't know what has caused it. Because back in the day, it was 25 minutes minimum, and you get a lot of time. Now, I'd wish that they changed that just so that they can avoid people doing this, but that's clearly not the reason. It's, as you said, probably the imam and local kind of reasons. And so what people are doing is that they come, they sit in a masjid, and they're thinking, what else am I going to do? So I might as well pray some nafil. So according to the Hanbali position, that are using this hadith, every prayer that's being offered is invalid, other than the two sunnah of Salatul Fajr. That's the consequence of this opinion. The consequence of saying that it is a prohibited time from the beginning of the start time of Fajr until the sun rises. That would mean that every prayer other than the two sunnah of Fajr would be invalidated. That's the Hanbali position. That's the consequence that I wanted to say. Now, Shaykh Uthaymeen says that the correct position in this issue is that the prohibition is not linked to the time, but linked to the Fajr prayer. Meaning that actually it's not after Fajr starts that is a prohibited time, but after you have prayed the obligatory units of Fajr. Why? Because of the hadith which is narrated in Sahih Muslim, when the Prophet ﷺ said, لا صلاة بعد صلاة الفجر حتى تطلع الشمس. This hadith is the authentic one in Sahih Muslim. What does it say? It says that there is no prayer after the Fajr prayer until the sun rises. There is no prayer after the Fajr prayer until the sun rises. To be translated as that there is no valid prayer. There is no prayer that can be offered after the Fajr prayer until the sun rises. So therefore, that's the position of this class. That is the key prohibited time linked to the Fajr prayer itself. The Shaykh then says that وَلَأَنَّ النَّهِي فِي الْعَصْرِ يَتَعَلَّقْ بِالصَّلَاةِ لَا بِالْوَقْتِ. Likewise, when it comes to the Asr prayer, and I think many of you will probably know that you're not allowed to pray after Salatul Asr. Yeah, this is narrated also in Bukhari as well and in Muslim, that one doesn't pray after Asr prayer until the sun sets. Likewise, the hadith is not about the start of Asr time, but after you've prayed Asr. Now, this is very important because in the Hanafi school, what do? They delay the Asr prayer. So instead of, for example, so here in Madinah, right? What time? 3:20? Asr started? Yeah, start time. We're praying it after what? 10 minutes? Ish? About 3:30? Maghrib's kicking in at 5:40? Yeah? That would mean we have, by praying at 3:30, taken out 2 hours and 10 minutes from the game. Imagine you're in the Haram, all right? I mean, Mecca, like, when we go tomorrow, right? You're there for 2 hours and 10 minutes. You don't have any tawaf to do because, you didn't get the booking and all that kind of behavior. So you got 2 hours and 10 minutes. And you're sitting there thinking, 100,000, let me get it at it. And then you're thinking, right, how am I going to do 100,000 when this is a time that I'm not allowed to pray? Okay? And it takes a lot of tawakkul and a lot of focus to understand and planning, how to plan a day out. Now, what I find interesting, actually I find fascinating, is that the Hanafi school, amongst its justifications for delaying the Asr prayer, one of them was so that people can get to pray more tatawwu' prayers, more nafil prayers. So if you imagine, they're going to make you pray your Asr prayer. I mean, if the Imam was Hanafi, he would be praying at something like 4:45. Imagine that, right? So we're praying at 3:30. He'd be praying like an hour 15 after that. You'd come to the masjid, you'd have like an hour to knock out 26 million prayers, probably. And then you pray the Asr prayer and you'd be so knackered by then anyway. So you say, you know what, I need an hour off anyway, right? So you'd wait until Maghrib and you'd be all right with that. It's an interesting angle. The real question, of course, what the three Imams would respond to the Hanafi position is this aqli justification enough to delay the Asr prayer when the Prophet ﷺ has only been reported in praying it at its earliest time? That's the real question. Is that justification, the aqli justification of delaying Asr prayer, good enough when we know that in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said that the prayer of the munafiq is the one where in Salatul Asr, the time starts, the sun starts to keep going, and the sky starts to become yellow, and it gets more yellow and more yellow. And when you hear this statement, more yellow, it means that the sun is becoming closer to Maghrib. So in the last hour, the last half an hour, and then suddenly he stands up, and then he prays Salatul Asr very quickly. The Prophet ﷺ said is that he pecks it, very quickly, because he knows that I don't have much time. Salatul Maghrib is about to kick in. Tilka Salatul Munafiq. That is the prayer of the munafiq. Of course, we'll respond and say that the person who's been described here is a person who's not even praying in the first place. He's sitting, actually. The Prophet ﷺ said he's sitting watching the sun. Unlike, Chacha who's praying 100 rak'at and he's not doing anything, like dossing around. He's busy in ibadah. It could go back and forth. There's no doubt, though, that the correct position is to pray the prayer on time and to reappropriate this act of this 2 hours time slot into something else. So you would be looking to do tawaf, you would be looking to do dhikr, you would be looking to do qira'ah or tilawa and so on. You would be instead focusing your prayers in the empty periods between Maghrib and Isha, or from Isha all the way through the rest of the evening until the second part of the evening. Or for example, in the duha time, which is after sunrise until dhuhr. Or for example, between Dhuhr and Asr. Why is it that you've left all of your day's achievements of 26 million just to the 2 hours of prohibition time? Your poor planning shouldn't be the reason that we start to change the rules or the wisdoms of Sharia. So something maybe to reflect upon. Anyway, so Shaykh then says, if this is the correct position then, what we're saying, which is that actually it's not prohibited to pray after Fajr, because the hadith says that it's prohibited from after the prayer of Fajr, the 2 rak'ah of Fard, until sunrise. How do we respond to the Hanbali position, who said that it's from the prayer time because of the hadith that they used? We say response number 1, the hadith is weak, which is the end of the story. By the way, the hadith, just for your reference, is narrated by Imam Abu Dawood, hadith number 1278. Also narrated, and Imam At-Tirmidhi as well, hadith 419. He said hadith gharib. It's a strange hadith. It is a hadith which is not just strange, actually, a hadith which is isolated in its chain, which we call strange, but it's isolated in its chain, meaning that it has a much greater propensity of being weak, and it is weak. So that's the first response. The second response to that hadith, to try to explain it away, is that even if we were to say, no, your hadith is authentic, we'll take it, okay, we'll act by it, then actually what the hadith means is not what they mean. So even if we assume that the hadith says there's no prayer after Fajr starts, not after the Fajr prayer, but after Fajr starts, then this basically means that it's not legislated to pray. It's not an Islamic requirement to pray. It is not legislated. One shouldn't pray. Not that one cannot pray, or that if a prayer is prayed, then it is invalid. Okay? So Shaykh Uthaymeen, he says that, and this is true anyway. Shaykh Uthaymeen says if we take this interpretation, then this is true anyway, because even though we believe that the hadith which is authentic on the matter, which is that you cannot pray after Salatul Fajr, even though we believe that, we also believe the other thing as well, which is that in this period of time, this is not a prayer time anyway. This is actually a prayer time which is not legislated for sunnah or nafal prayers. We see the Prophet ﷺ pray every single day. We have so many hadith and we do not see him pray any single prayer in this period of time, other than the 2 sunnah of Fajr. So it is not considered to be a legislated prayer time anyway, regardless. That's why you'll find in the books of fiqh that it's never mentioned as a primary prohibited prayer time, but in the kind of secondary matters, when people ask, when is it not good to pray, we say after the Fajr adhan. After the Fajr adhan, until the iqamah of Salatul Fajr, one shouldn't be praying nafil. Is that clear? Jiva.
So the opinion that says it's legislated from the time of Fajr.
Yeah.
Is the assumption there that Fajr is an exception?
Yes, it is. That is with the assumption that the 2 rak'ah of Fajr is exception.
You can't basically use it as an argument to argue that.
Correct. They're not even attempting to do that. We're all agreeing that the 2 sunnah is something which is an exception because there's text. Yeah, this is exactly about the scenario that I described. Person coming early, right? And or there being a long period and then being in the masjid at that time, and then them starting to make themselves busy and they start praying, 2 more. All right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind. All right. Then the next prohibited time is وَمِن طُلُوعِهَا حَتَّى تَرْتَفِعَ قِيدَ رَمْحٍ. That it is, or rumh, that this is the time when the sun rises until it's above the horizon, the length of a spear. The length of a spear. What does this mean? So sunrise is what? If you imagine this is the sun's disk, okay? And this is the horizon, and you can't see what's behind the horizon, or obviously you can't because it's behind the horizon. Then you see the tip of the disk just above, that is sunrise. Okay? The first appearance. Not lots of bright light, no, it's the appearance of the disk. So as soon as you see the disk appear above the horizon, this is the beginning. This is now going to go like this. It's going to rise until it gets above the horizon, until it's cleared the actual horizon itself. This clearing the horizon is described as until it is the height of a spear, right? The height of a spear is that whole visual illusion. You know when you do that whole thing like that? Yep, and you try to, you know what I mean, right? So if you had a spear and you put it down like that, and you could then see that there's a gap between the horizon and the sun, and it's the length of a spear, like 1 or 2 meters. This is enough clearance off the ground for you to be in the safe zone to pray again. That's what's basically been described. In other words, this is how it used to be seen back in the day. Today, nobody needs to refer to it like that. All you need to refer it to is that from sunrise, you don't pray for 15 or 20 minutes. That's basically how we understand it. For 15 to 20 minutes, Sheikh Uthaymeen says 10 to 12 minutes. This is because of the equator here, because in Medina and generally the Middle East, we are very equatorial. And remember that these rules differ according to where you are on the planet. So yeah, here, 10 to 12 minutes is how long it takes. Suddenly, you know, it happens just like that. The sun is above very quickly. But back, you know, in our places, it takes longer, right? That's because of the angle that we have. So you'd wait 15, 18 minutes until the sun is clear and you can see, you know, the full disc. And as long as you can see the full disc, you're good. Okay? That's the next time. Now, then Sheikh says the third time which is being referred to, وَعِنْدَ قِيَامِهَا حَتَّى تَزُولُ. This is when the sun is at its high point until it falls. Now this is referring to the sun at its zenith, or when it hits the meridian. All right? What this means is, as you know, the sun rises in the east, all right, and it goes high. Obviously, it's not just the sun which is moving, the earth is moving as well, so everything's in a state of motion. And when the sun hits its absolute very highest point, very highest point, it's almost like it reaches that point and almost like it freezes. And until it then falls, and I mean by fall, meaning that it goes towards the western side. So once it's at its highest point and it hits its western side, it starts to now go and the afternoon starts. So this is known in English as noon. Not 12 o'clock, it's known as noon. So noon is at its absolute middle, and then afternoon is when it starts to go into the after of the collapse. And the before noon is all the way up to that highest moment. Now when it gets to that moment there and it's kind of stationary at its highest point, this is known as the time of zawal, right? This is the time where it's not allowed to pray. And we wait again another 10, 12, 15 minutes until the sun moves from this highest point. This is actually called a setting. It's the first sunset because the sun starts to set, okay? And now what you'll find is that when your shadows were going that way, and then your shadows were now not there because it was directly above you, and then the shadow goes a little bit to the left because we're on a little bit of an axis, right? So the earth is a little bit like that. And so when it's at its highest point, there's a tiny shadow, but the shadow freezes. Soon as the shadow starts to elongate to the east and the sun is to the west, meaning it's hitting across you like that, you now know that Dhuhr has started. So you've seen in the model, you remember in Dar al-Madinah, in the museum? Do you remember when we went from stage to stage describing the mosque's developments, right? And we saw that when the Uthmani expansion occurred, they added a pole into the middle, and that middle is still there, of course, it's still preserved. The pole isn't, but the location of the pole is, and that pole was acting as a sundial. And because you've got all this space around it, you've got basically the sun, which is moving in its normal time, and that shadow would be observed, and it would act as a very accurate way of determining what time the prayer is to be. So for example, as soon as it goes past to the west and the shadow starts to elongate from to the east, we know Dhuhr has kicked in. For example, we know that when the sun starts to drop further and then the pole and its shadow are equal, then the Shafi'is have entered into their Asr prayer. When we know that the shadow, when the sun has gone further down, so it's now lower and it hits across that pole and the shadow is now twice the length of that original pole, then we know that the Hanafi Asr time has kicked in. So these shadows are important for us to understand the prayer time. Now, what's the evidence for this third time being a prohibited time? The evidence is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ narrated by Uqba ibn Amir radiallahu ta'ala anhum. He said that the Prophet ﷺ said, ثلاث ساعات نهانا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن نصلي فيهن. That there are 3 times that the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم prohibited us from praying therein. وأن نقبر فيهن موتانا. And he prohibited us from burying our dead in these 3 times. So you can't pray in these 3 times, and you can't bury the dead in these 3 times. What are they? حين تطلع الشمس بازغة حتى ترتفع. When the sun is rising until it is above the horizon. That's the first prohibited time. وحين يقوم قائم الظهيرة. And when the sun is stationary at its highest point, it is standing stationary at its highest point. وحين تضيف الشمس لغروب حتى تغرب. Okay, and the final one is when the sun starts to fall and set until it is completely disappeared. When the sun starts to set until it's completely disappeared. If you look at this hadith, it is describing 3 times, 3 short times, and the 3 most intense times. Short times and intense times. All 3 are clearly focused around the sun itself. It's not now focusing on prayer, and it's not focusing on long times, it's focusing on the actual movement of the sun itself. So in the first one, it was the sun coming onto the scene. That's a haram time for 15 minutes. The second one is the sun being at its highest point and being very clear and very obvious. And then the third one is the sun being there and suddenly disappearing from the scene. So it's all surrounding the sun. Obviously, I covered this before as well, but just as a reminder, we're just obviously covering it again. Anyway, the 4th time then, وَمِن صَلَاةِ الْعَصْرِ إِلَى غُرُوبِهَا. The 4th prohibited time is after you pray Salatul Asr until the sun starts to set. When does the sun start to set? If we use the example of our sun again, and this is the disc, it starts to set as soon as the disc hits the horizon. So once the disc hits the horizon, okay, and it's starting to disappear, this is sunset. Okay, this is the start of sunset, sorry. Now, why is this important to understand? Because when you go to Google, right, or your phone app, weather app, etc., you're looking at sunset time, you need to know what is that referring to. Because if your phone is saying sunset time is this, and you're using that to pray, then that's a disaster. Because that's a haram time for you to pray. Actually, sunset on your app is indicating the correct sunset that we all believe in as well, which is that. That's sunset. The sun has disappeared underneath the horizon. All right? Now, what you'll notice in pretty much all of your weather apps and everything is that it's kind of saying, like, for example, 5:40, and the actual adhan or the Muslim timetables and calendars is adding another 2 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes, sometimes 1 minute, etc. This is a habit which the Muslims have been doing for a long time. It's not just something which is new. And they justify it by saying that there are visual illusions and there are some mistakes that can be made, and there are we're accounting for inaccuracies in the
Talk about the travelling of light.
huh?
The time it takes for the light to get back.
Yeah, there's that as well. They're saying that we've got to allow for an actual, which is crazy if you think about it, right? We're allowing for the actual distance of the light to come from the sun to us. That takes like X amount of seconds, minutes, blah, blah, blah. All of this being added. And this, of course, is not necessary. This is not necessary. And it is okay for a person just to use the app that is, as long as it's accurate, of course, to that says sunset. And that is sufficient to be able to use. All right. Now, the final and the 5th part is the actual sunset itself. So I was saying, yeah, that according to the author, the 4th time is from when the Asr prayer has been prayed, all of this time until the sun starts to hit the horizon. The 5th time is the actual one that we just mentioned in the hadith, the actual setting. This is taking an hour, obviously, or 2 hours, depending upon, you know, what time you prayed your Asr prayer. Yeah, so this could be 1 or 2 hours. Whereas this part, which is the actual haram, proper haram time, the intense haram time, if you like, that's another 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Sun starting to set until it's completely set. The disk is gone. That's the 5th time. So in summary, I know that, I was all over the place. Let me summarize it. It starts from the morning, these 5 prayer times, okay, that you are not allowed to pray in. The first of them is after you pray Salatul Fajr until the sun starts to rise. The second is the sun rising until it's clear above the horizon. The third is when the sun's at its highest point. The fourth is after you pray Salatul Asr until the sun begins to set. The fifth is the sun setting itself. If you look at these 5 times, 3 are very, very short, focusing on just on the sun. The second time, the third time, and the 5th time. As for the first time, it's a long period of time. All right, it's like an hour and a half really, after or an hour or whatever, after Salatul Fajr until obviously sunrise. And you look at the 4th time, which is after Asr until that's another hour, hour and a half, 2 hours actually in our case here in Medina at the moment. So that's an example of the 2 long times, and you can call it the 2 general times, and you've got the 3 short times. You can call that the 3 intense times, proper haram times. Okay, proper haram times. A question, and we'll close with this. What's the reason behind the prohibition of times? What's the wisdom behind it? Why have prohibited times, and why these times specifically? Sheikh Uthaymeen often asks this question, okay, or asks us to ponder this question, and each time that he does that, it's clear that he wants to make it a teaching point. The teaching point is that the wisdom is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said so, and the Prophet ﷺ has said so. There is no need for any wisdom. It's like a trick kind of question, and he always slaps people down in the beginning, chops them, then he gives the reason afterwards as well. He does it all the time, right? And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. It's nice to be reminded that sometimes. And the reason that I think that is relevant for us is because obviously today in the Umrah seminar, I made this point, right? That actually, if I read the ayah to you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 36, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. That when Allah, it's not for the believer male and not for the believing female, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger have decreed a matter, that they have a choice in what has been obligated upon them. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is indicating that once something has been decided, that's the end of the matter. It is pure slavery that this ayah is emphasizing. And as I mentioned before, when you break down the act of Umrah, and when you break down the act of Tawaf, and its direction, and its numbers, and the object that we're going around, and what we do with the object at different places, different times, it is pure slavery. It is emphasizing pure slavery. You might want to try and make sense of it. You might want to try and develop some spiritual benefits out of it. You might try, and you see people, they write books and they say that center of gravity is doing this, and the world is going around like that, and so when you're doing you're this, and you're in line with the stars, and all this kind of bakwas, right? People are desperate to have rational kind of explanations for their acts of worship. That's why I do find it beneficial that our primary function in life is just to obey. We are slaves. We don't deserve any explanation. We are slaves of the Creator. If He gives us an explanation, we're very grateful, because it might motivate us a bit more, might give us a bit of an understanding, etc., etc. So, and Sheikh Uthaymeen has quoted the ayah, which establishes this, and then he quotes a hadith as well, which establishes the same thing. Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, why is it that the menstruating woman, she makes up her fasts, but she doesn't make up her prayer? I bet that's a question that many of you have asked yourselves, right? She makes up her fast when she's menstruating, but she doesn't make up her prayer. And she says, كَانَ يُصِيبُنَا ذَلِكَ فَنُؤْمَرْ بِقَضَاءِ الصَّوْمِ وَلَا نُؤْمَرْ بِقَضَاءِ الصَّلَاةِ. That's what used to happen to us, and we were told to make up the fast, and we were not told to make up the prayers. All right? Which is just the next level answer, right? Meaning that, what kind of question is that? That's what used to happen to us. We used to make up the fasts, and we didn't used to make up the prayer. What she's indicating is that this is a ruling, not something for me to think about and try to understand, or I want to understand. Now that doesn't negate the need to understand things, but it's making it clear in our hearts and minds that let's actually focus on the real reason. And that is because we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has decreed the ruling and we're going to accept it. Some wisdoms though is that we know that the mushrikeen used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at these times, specifically. At the sunrise, sunset. And by the way, I don't know, obviously we were here. We weren't here, actually we were leaving for Umrah. But that was of course on the winter solstice. And if you were watching the live feed from Stonehenge, and I'm not saying I was, but I'm just saying that I was, yeah? Then you see some full bakwas going down. Full bakwas, all right? Because obviously that, and it was a very sunny day. I don't know whether you noticed, right? It was sunny, so they enjoyed a good one. And you see all kinds of, nakedness and singing and dancing. And at the key moment, first of all, you can see the one where when it was at its highest point, which they absolutely love. And then, of course, when the sun was setting. Now, obviously, for them, if it's the sun god and all this kind of paganism, right? And so when it's setting, it is incredibly glorious, which of course it is, right? And so therefore, this is the display of might and power. And of course, when the sun appears on the scene, the display of might and power. And when it's at its highest point and its hottest point, a display of might and power of the sun god and blah, 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 blah. Right? So because of this kind of association of the mushrikeen, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated for us to be different. Shaykh Uthaymeen then goes right off on one. All right? He just goes and emphasizes just how different we are from the mushrikeen and how important a principle that is in our sharia. That whenever it's possible, we will emphasize the difference between us and the mushrikeen. So he starts quoting Umar, and when he starts quoting Umar and on differences between the believers and mushrikeen, then make sure you turn off the recording and get all of the liberals out of the room, because things are about to get rocky. So he says, so therefore it's obligatory upon the Muslims that if there's any way to show a difference between us and the mushrikeen, then you should do that. For example, Umar would not allow people to ride, the mushrikeen to ride a horse when the believers were riding, because only the believers deserve that kind of izzah and honor to ride. You lot can walk, okay? And he would say, and he goes that because this is the honor of Islam to be on a horse, and it's a war tool as well. And if a dhimmi, meaning someone who's just like a non-Muslim citizen who's miskeen paying he's under the protection of the state, if he starts to feel, as a dhimmi, I'm very special and honored as well, then why would he bother becoming Muslim? Right? Look at this description, right? And Sheikh goes, and it is required from the Muslim to humiliate the kafir. It is required because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu, jahid al-kuffar wal-munafiqina waghluz alayhim wa ma'wahum jahannam wa bi'sal masir. O Prophet, fight the kuffar and the munafiqeen and be harsh against them, because their destination is Jahannam, and what a horrible destination. Verse 9, Surah Tahrim. And so Umar, because of this, he used to then prohibit them from riding that which the Muslims used to ride. So if we're going to ride the horses, you're going to ride the mules. We're going to ride the camels, then you're going to ride whatever it is. And this is actually quite funny. He goes, also, when you ride, you have to ride with both feet on one side. You know that whole, like how you put a woman on the thingy, which is the part I don't get. I thought that was a respectful way. When you take a lady and you put both her feet to the side, so she's sitting like this.
Yeah, but it's emasculating for men. It's not.
They say they hold the reins and they're going like this, you see? I thought that this was in Urturu, that's how they put the women on. Pakistani motorbike. Allah, that's exactly the best example. I see that, wallahi, and he's riding it properly, and Bajari, she's sitting like this, and your heart is in your mouth. Wallahi, I drove past it in Karachi just a couple of weeks ago, and exactly like that. They have the keys.
The kids, the women.
No, that's haram. I don't speak about that. No helmet, no kids. Don't go into that part. But I don't understand why she's sitting like that. So when I saw that, I thought it was out of respect. A woman's not meant to straddle the whole thing and ladylike. So it's out of respect. Chief, is it respectful or what's going on? Why do you do that to your girls over there? Put some spec on their name. No, seriously, who knows?
So in England, in the olden days, it was for respect.
It was respect.
It was. So noble women wouldn't have to go through the difficulty of climbing a horse, getting.
They just like hop down.
Yeah, and And they were helped up. Right?
Helped up.
They never
Yep.
climbed the horse themselves. They
Yep.
were helped.
So I don't get that. يعني he says أي على جانب واحد فتكون أرجلهم من الجانب الأيمن كلها.
So it says if a man does it, that's emasculating.
If a man does it, then it's embarrassing, yeah?
That's what a woman's being does it like that. Yeah.
Yani, what you're saying is that it is humiliating.
Yeah.
It's not.
But it's meant to be for the kuffar. He didn't mention like males and females, right? You're 100% right. I mean, a male sitting like that, that's weird, isn't it?
That's why they're doing it, isn't it?
What, no, but that's what my dad just said. It's taking the men down, but what? The women are not going to feel down like that, are they?
It's most like John men, isn't it?
Probably.
Yeah.
He used to, of course, shave heads. Listen, Umar didn't mess about. You know when people started getting a bit leery, and he used to take their hair off, he used to mark them. We have narrations in the Musannaf. And if you don't want to, listen, don't bring up Umar when it comes to ruling systems in Islam in front of non-Muslim audiences, okay? Stick to the Abu Bakr era, stick to the Uthman era, then you're going to be okay. If you're in the da'wah mode. If you're angry, then just do a presentation on Umar and how he used to mark people and their clothes and whatnot, then people will learn the lesson. All right, so anyway, Sheikh says that this is important because being different from them in the prayer is important. Was that for me? Was that for me? You cheeky little fish. You cheeky little fish. Well, I put a spec on that. I'm there, by the way, I finished. I said I'm going to finish this section. I did it in 1 hour. Mesa, have some of that. So, I can't believe you didn't trust me. Unbelievable. So, now, what I'll say is that, because questions is asked, is that right? Is this fair? Is this the reality of Muslims and Islam? And the truth is that it was a different era, and the mushrikeen had caused a lot of problems, and this was an Islamic state, and. This is not, of course, the behavior that you should go back and do, and actually you should go and try it, and they'll give you a couple of slaps and throw you into the river anyway. So this is not something which is copied behavior. You are citizens, and depending upon them, blah, blah, blah. So let me just make that clear disclaimer just in case someone gets a bit carried away. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. All right, any questions before we start eating our chocolate? Yes.
So what's the name for Asr?
Yes.
Is that so? As soon as you kill Dhuhr and Asr together, you killed off 4 or 5 hours.
It's a very good question, right? So if a person is combining between Dhuhr and Asr, now we know that when you combine between Dhuhr and Asr, maybe as a traveler or maybe as whatever you are, okay, you have a legal excuse, you are allowed to combine at the later time and the earlier time. If you combine at the earlier time, that means that you're praying Dhuhr and Asr early at 1 o'clock or whatever, and that means you now got 4 or 5 hours that you have created for yourself, as the question is, of a prohibited time.
But it defeats the object, doesn't it? Because you combine it to make it easier, not just one prayer for 400.
That's one possible explanation, that you wouldn't be wanting to pray anyway. But you know, Pakistani, they will do that,
But they never combine.
but they will even combine and then they'll pray all of the nafals anyway. Yeah, they'll do Suwari. What do you think? What do you think the answer to that is?
Because I know in the Hanbali madhab, it is straight. No, but I just wondering if there are any other.
Yeah, well there are, and I tell you what the evidences for the other side are. That no, it's not extended. Okay, it's not actually not just Hanbalis. The Al-Hadith are sticking to the Hadith, right? They're saying that the Asr prayer is Asr prayer, just like the Witr prayer starts at Maghrib time. If you combine Maghrib and Isha, then your Witr prayer can be prayed. Otherwise, what's the point of the concession, right? So even though Witr prayer is a long night prayer, but if you want to go to sleep, that's the whole point. You're combining Maghrib and Isha as someone who's traveling or someone who's in jihad and you want to go to sleep, and now you're being told you can't pray the Witr prayer. Of course Witr prayer comes in because it technically follows the Isha. Likewise, the prohibited time technically follows the Salat al-Asr even if it's prayed early. That's a safe hadith, correct position. The others, what they'll say is that they will use the general hadith which are talking about the light, talking about the lateness, the closeness to Maghrib, to indicate that it's more prayer time than it is the prayer itself. But the evidence seems to be with the those that stick to the more authentic hadith, which focus on the Asr prayer. It's an anomaly, frankly. It's an anomaly. Yeah? All right. Why did some scholars say it was makruh for women to ride horses? For that reason, because of unladylike manner and fitna that's caused when the hymen breaks because of the movement, etc., etc., etc. Sumaira says that Umar legislated this for which Dhimmi community? There's only one Dhimmi community. There's no different type. Only the people who actually. What's this, man? I'm trying to, when you try to have some gravitas and decorum about it, and you realize that it's not happening, yeah? Now go do a Bapandu move now. Right. Are we doing proper LP style, like when we chuck it out and stuff, yeah? No. Yeah, that's the whole point. You guys. That's what you're Arab, you see? Yallah, there we go. Catch. There we go. This is the LP tradition, by the way, that we always give out chocolates. Shazzy, you meant to try and catch it, not yani maybe it. It's been a long, long time since we did this, by the way. A long time, to be honest, and I miss it. Oh, not bad, Lala. You can play cricket. Huh? 20 months before we did this. Right. Now this is where online now they start to get upset. Oh, what a catch, mashallah. Oh, you see? Elders. Respect on the elders' name. There we go. Hafsa. There we go. Very good. Now Dishrat's eating. I can see you ain't got nothing there. Right, okay. Everyone got some chocolate? Go ahead, Iman. Bismillah. Quiet, please. If you're outside, then yeah, that's the whole point of it being described in these terms. In modern times, because nobody knows what the sun is, where it is, what it looks like, we use the apps. And from the apps, you will see the prayer times and then you'll work around them. So when you see, for example, if you, let's do this actually, it's a good exercise. Open up your phone on your prayer app. Okay, everybody look at their prayer app. Let's all do this, okay? It's a really good question actually. You see, that's the difference, man. Young folks ask practical questions. All right? She basically asked, are we meant to do this based upon the sun? Actually, no one's ever going to do that, are they? Everyone's going to be looking at their prayer app and they're going to see, and now I will tell you now what times are prohibited according to your app. All right, so tell us what it says, all of the prayer times for today or tomorrow, or whatever. No, I want Iman to do it. Yeah. Fajr is at 5:41, yeah? So according to our class position, knowing that Fajr is at 5:41, whatever time you actually pray Fajr, let's say 6 o'clock, then from 6 o'clock until, what's the next time? Sunrise. So you now know that the first prohibited time is from 6 o'clock, because that's when you prayed Fajr, until sunrise, which is, what did you say, 7 o'clock? Yeah, until 7 o'clock, you know that that's the prohibited time, right? So that's the first thing that you're able to work out by looking at a prayer app. Now you look at the next prayer time. 12:24 is the time for Dhuhr. That's the Dhuhr start time. The Dhuhr start time is at the end of that period of time when the sun is at its highest moment. That means that for the 15 minutes before the Dhuhr start time, it's a prohibited time. Okay? Likewise, if you go back to sunrise, when you look at that sunrise time, the 10-15 minutes before that is also a prohibited time. Now look at the next time. What time? 3:23. And so now you know that from 3:23 as a start time, whenever you pray Asr, let's say 4 o'clock or 3:30 or whatever, from when you pray Asr until the next time, which is the sunset time, which is what time? 5:42. So you now know that if Maghrib is 5:42, that means Maghrib has occurred. And we said that process of Maghrib occurring, which is the sun disappearing, if you reverse that upwards, then 5:42 minus 10-15 minutes, so 5:25, from 5:25 to 5:42, that's the time in which the sun is disappearing. That's a haram time. And now working backwards again, you now know that from your Asr, when you prayed it, so you said it starts at 3:20, And if you prayed it at 4 o'clock, then from 4 o'clock until 5:25, that's a general haram time. And then from 5:25 until 5:40, because that's the proper one, that's a haram time as well. Those are your 5 prohibited times. So the knowledge that we just said here, you apply it to your app by going backwards, because the app is showing when sunrise is done, and what's it called, man? The sunset time is showing when the sunset is thingy. I just said, sorry, I made a mistake. I made a blatant mistake. The sunrise time is the start of the sunrise. My apologies. So when you look at the sunrise time, the prayer is in the first prohibited time is prohibited up to sunrise time, but your Fajr Fard prayer, if you hadn't prayed your actual Fard, you could pray it right up to that sunrise time. It is the 10-15 minutes after that sunrise time, which is the haram time to pray. That's the actual time when the sun starts to rise. So when it says 7:02 or 7:01, that's when the sun disk appears and prayer cannot be now offered. You got to wait for it to now go up above the sky, above the horizon, 10-15 minutes. That's the prohibited time. All right, I made a complete mash of that, but anyway. Right, any other questions? Sharaz, you had a question?
Actually, it was similar to her.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's really, if you look at the prayers itself, it's the prayer plus the sunrise, and then zenith to the duhur.
Yep.
And then the whenever you pray the asr to the maghrib.
Yep.
They're all forbidden.
Correct. That's a good summary. Exactly that. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Let's say if you're in a rush and you miss Sunnah for Fajr,
Yeah.
catch Jama'ah, you should then wait until after the Dhuhr Shaf.
That's right. The question is that what should you do if you miss the Sunnah of Fajr? You arrive at the masjid, you haven't prayed your Sunnah, and the Iqamah goes, what should you do? You should pray your Fajr with the Jama'ah, because you are commanded to pray. In the Hanafi school, what do? They say that you've got to get your Sunnah in first because order is more obligatory. So even if the Imam has started, you're going to quickly pray your Sunnah as quickly as possible and then try to join the Imam before he finishes the prayer. The rest of the scholars, and it's the correct position, of course, the position of the majority, is that it is not permissible to pray when the Imam is praying. You can't initiate a prayer, let alone continue in one. So you write that off. You've missed the opportunity to pray the Sunnah prayer on time. You will join the Imam. You will finish the Fard with that Imam. And then you will wait until sunrise has finished, done. Then you'll pray the 2 Sunnah. That's the correct way of making up the Sunnah prayer. However, there are some narrations that are authentic of some of the major companions praying the 2 Sunnah of Fajr straight after that they missed, straight after the 2 Fard of the Jama'ah. And the best way to reconcile these actions with the narrations that we know is to basically say that if there is a person who knows that they are not going to pray those 2 Sunnah of Fajr, which are very, very important, very emphasized units, and they know that they're not going to pray them because they're at work or because they're at school or because they're traveling, after sunrise I mean, then for them, those people, there's an exemption. You can pray it straight after the Fard prayer. But in principle, you should avoid it and you should wait until praying it later. Dilshad, yeah?
You know when you're praying your Sunnah and the Imam starts his prayer?
Yes.
And you're halfway.
Yes.
Just stop and
You do just stop unless you are very confident that you're able to quickly finish whilst the Imam is still somewhere in the kind of Fatiha type kind of the first rak'ah. You should not be delaying, carrying on with your own Sunnah prayer or whatever prayer it is that you're doing and say, it's okay, as long as I catch the Imam at the end, then I'm going to be okay.
While we start our prayer, doing our Sunnah, he sort of starts all of a sudden.
Yeah. If you're at the start, like in the first rak'ah, you are hardly ever going to try and, yeah. But if you're in the second rak'ah, you make a judgment call. So, for example, it happened to me the other day, and I was in the second rak'ah at the beginning, and I heard the iqamah. I was very comfortable with it. I carried on. Why? Because I know the mu'adhin. He wasn't the old guy who just says quickly. This is the young kid, who's a young buck, and he was going. So I knew I had plenty of time.
I did it in the third, but I stopped.
In the third.
There were the 4 Sunnahs before
Okay, got you. Yeah, I mean, if you're, yeah, I mean, if you got 2 left or 3 left, then you know you got to pull out. No, you should pull out. You should pull out. Yeah.
But do you carry on then? Do you put it afterwards?
Yeah, if you pray your sunnah regularly, then you can make it up afterwards. That's right. Yeah. Yet another one. Yeah.
What about Tahiyatul Masjid? So like, I thought you were supposed to sit down after you pray Tahiyatul Masjid.
That's right. You are meant to sit down after you pray your Tahiyatul Masjid. You're saying that if you've prayed sunnah already at home and you come to the Fajr Jama'ah, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about like if you go to like Maghrib for the Masjid for Maghrib.
Yep.
But it's the
Prohibited time. So that's going to come in the next couple of lessons. Are there any exceptions to these rules, right? We've given general rules, but are there any exceptions? Sarah Amir, I'm just going to tell you that if I go, okay, I'm going to do it because she's back and she might then disappear again and then, you know, okay, all right. So the prohibited times, but this is a summary of the class, everybody, okay? This is Sarah Amir's summary, so you can listen very carefully. She's very good at this. So, the prohibited times for the prayer. This applies for the non-obligatory prayers, as supererogatory prayers should be prayed continuously throughout the day, on all days, except when explicitly told not to. These are awqat al-nahi, prohibited times as follows. Number 1, from the true dawn until sunrise. The true dawn is when the horizon, where the sky meets the land, begins to be full of light and illuminated with reddish light, which extends from the horizon upwards and continues to brighten the sky until the sun rises. The first or false dawn is not associated with the horizon. Rather, it is a diffuse Sarah, temporary illumination of the middle of the sky, not the horizon, which disappears and darkness reappears. Very good. The Hanbali position is that the prohibited time for prayer begins from the true dawn time. This opinion is derived from a weak hadith which states that there is no prayer after the start of Fajr except for the 2 sunnah rak'ah of Fajr and Fajr. Correct. Therefore, they hold that any other prayers offered after the true dawn enters are invalid. Sheikh Uthaymeen and the class position is that the prohibition is not linked to the time of the entrance of the false or true dawn. Rather, it is linked to the actual prayer of Fajr. Therefore, the prohibited time is the time after one prays the Fajr Salah until sunrise. That's very good. Number 2. The second prohibited time is from the sunrise until it has risen above the horizon, the length of a spear. Sunrise is when the top tip of the sun appears above the horizon, not just its light and not the whole sun, just the uppermost part becoming visible above the horizon. The end of the prohibition is when the whole sun is above the horizon by about the length of a spear. This is about 15 to 20 minutes in the west. Number 3, from the zenith until it starts to descend. When the sun is at its highest point, this is called zawal, and it seems stationary until it begins to set towards the west. This is derived from a hadith which mentions 3 times the Prophet ﷺ prohibited prayers and buried the dead, which are based on the sun itself and its location in the sky. These are the 3 short periods, and appears whilst the sun is rising, whilst the sun is in the middle of the sky. No, not in the middle of the sky. We should put whilst the sun is at its zenith, at the highest point of its orbit, okay, is the more accurate statement, and whilst the sun is setting. These are the intense times of prohibition, proper haram times, as opposed to the 2 other general times of prohibition. Number 4, after praying Asr until the beginning of sunset. So sunset begins as soon as the lowermost part of the sun touches the horizon. This period could be about 2 hours long or so, depending upon what time you pray your Asr prayer. And the 5th and final time of prohibition is from the beginning of sunset until it is completed. So from as soon as the lowermost part of the sun touches the horizon until it can no longer be visible behind the horizon. The reasoning for these times is simply that Allah decreed it. Some wisdoms, though, include being as different to the non-believers as possible. So as they hold these times as sacred, we should do the total opposite. On that note, I also want to say that for the middle time, when the sun is at its zenith, then the Prophet ﷺ told us that at that time, that exact time, the hellfire explodes. So it has a level of heat which is expressed, and that's a taster that we get at that hottest time of the day. So of course, to be avoiding the explosions of Jahannam. I want to end with a statement which is important, that I should have said this like a week ago. To you folks, I was expecting you to be part of the game anyway, but in these times that the mushrikeen are partying and festive spirit, and they're practicing amongst them, Christians, whatever, they are doing their mass and they're doing all that kind of thing, it is required from our sunnah to be going harder than them in our own acts of ibadah. Now it's easy when you're in a trip like this and all you're doing is ibadah, but those who are at home should also try to increase in the acts of worship as much as possible. Alright folks, Jazakumullah khair. Jazakumullah khair guys online. Barakallahu feekum. I appreciate your attendance. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك اللهم وأتوب إليك. Next week, inshallah, back to a normal time on Wednesday, I believe. Inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.